Have you ever imagined that a seemingly ordinary expedition could become the final chapter of a life, where someone is trapped forever in darkness, where cries for help echo into silence, where despair seeps through cracks in the rock? This is the story of John Edward Jones. He was buried forever beneath the ground. On November 24th, 2009, John, a 26-year-old with an endless passion for exploration, together with his brother Josh and some friends, decided to explore Nutty Putty Cave, located near Salt Lake City, Utah, USA. It was first discovered by explorers in 1960. The interior of this cave is extremely narrow. The path ahead twisted and turned. Between 1999 and 2004, there were many serious accidents here, related to safety hazards, so it was shut down by the government for years. But many cave explorers strongly opposed the closure. The cave reopened in 2009. However, several mandatory conditions were added. To enter the cave, you had to register in advance, and there had to be at least 2 people. One member of the team had to be a professional to let others in safely. John and his friends received a permit, and the moment they arrived, they couldn't wait and immediately entered the cave. As they crawled in just a few dozen meters from the entrance, they found the space unusually wide. There were barely any major obstacles for them. Most tourists, after reaching this point, would take a few photos and turn back the same way, because moving further ahead was extremely dangerous. That area is known as the birth canal. The path here is very narrow and slopes upward. You can't use your arms or legs for power. You have to rely on joints to slowly crawl forward. People say once you get through the tightest section, there's a chamber at the end where you can turn back. That moment felt no different than trying to come out of your mother's birth canal. Crossing that passage feels like being reborn. That's why it was named the birth canal. John loved a challenge, so he volunteered to go first. Some others followed behind. After struggling through a steep passage, they entered a wide V-shaped cavern. There were many jagged rocks and uneven surfaces. They were forced to twist their bodies in all directions, letting the shoulders pass first, then twisting their hips and legs through, moving step by step. Only small, flexible people could get through more easily. John tried many times to pass, but the space ahead was extremely tight. He was tall and broad. Turning around was impossible. He could only keep crawling forward. However, the cave map ended here. No one had gone deeper before. John hesitated for a long time before deciding to press on. He had no idea at that moment it would be the worst decision of his life. After about an hour, he approached the edge of a steep drop. A dark, narrow slope loomed below, yet he remained calm, believing the tunnel would open up ahead. So he kept adjusting his position with his hands. Eventually, he lowered his head and pushed forward. But the slope was too steep. He couldn't control his descent and slid down. Now John started to panic. It was impossible to back out. He could only brace himself with his hands, and shouted to warn his teammates not to follow him down. But he was already stuck, and couldn't move. At that moment, John's headlamp happened to shine ahead. Not far away, there was another deep tunnel. He twisted slightly and slowly inched forward, trying to squeeze through the tiny opening, hoping to find another exit. But before he could think further, his entire body suddenly dropped and became tightly wedged. That's when he realized the tunnel was nearly vertical and ended in a dead end. His head was pinned at the bottom. The space was incredibly small, only 25 centimeters wide and 45 centimeters tall. He tried to push himself back, but both arms were stuck. He couldn't apply any force. The more he struggled, the deeper he sank. Surrounded by darkness, John fell into a panic. He began calling out loudly for his brother Josh. Josh heard him and immediately crawled in. When crawling through the narrow cliff section, to ensure safety, he chose to crawl backward across the cliff. When crossing the cliff, he saw only John's legs exposed, the rest of his body trapped deep in the cave. Josh advanced inch by inch, until his feet could touch his brother's. Josh tried to clamp with his legs and slowly pull his brother upward. But after 2 exhausting attempts, Both of them were drained, and nothing worked. Only then did they realize the seriousness, so Josh hurried out to seek help. Being upside down for so long made John increasingly afraid. The rocks were pressing into his chest. Even breathing became a struggle. At 12:30 a.m. on the 25th, the first rescue worker, Susie, finally arrived. To ensure safety, she tied a string around her ankle, then crawled in alone. John had already been upside down for 3 hours. Susie secured the rescue rope to his leg, then returned to start pulling. But because of the cave's slope, the friction was too high to pull effectively. After analyzing several methods, the rescuers decided to try a pulley system, but the wire was long, and installing the pulleys took a lot of time. Someone needed to stay with John and talk to ease his panic, because the human body cannot endure being upside down too long. By then, John had been battling gravity for 12 hours. His blood circulation had slowed, breathing grew harder. All night long, he went from calm and alert to helplessly twitching his legs. He even began to hallucinate. His wife spoke to him by phone, encouraging him to stay strong, to survive. By around PM on the 25th, the rescue team had finally finished installing the pulleys. John's legs were pulled up inch by inch, but when his foot hit the rock above, he screamed in pain. His legs were completely purple. There was no other way. They had to stop for a moment, then try again with even more care. Everyone was tense, not daring to let their guard down. There was no room above to move. To escape, he had to bend both legs, but John could no longer control his muscles. The entire rescue operation suddenly became stalled. Even more terrifying as the pull intensified, John began seizing violently and passed out. When he awoke, he was no longer lucid. The pulley system had borne too much weight for too long and suddenly snapped. There was no choice but to rebuild it from scratch. An hour later, the new line was ready. But no screams came from the cave. A medical expert crawled beside him. The equipment check showed that John was no longer breathing. It was early morning on November 26th. Rescuers had stayed awake for 24 hours, but could not save him. Even worse, the cave was extremely narrow, and John's body had stiffened. Retrieving his remains became nearly impossible. The authorities had no other choice but to seal the entire cave. Since then, Nutty Putty Cave has been permanently closed. The government even placed a memorial plaque at the entrance in memory of John the Great Explorer.